Hello and welcome to the latest in the series of Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists webinars. And today we are going to be talking about student placements supporting the future speech and language therapy workforce. For those that don't know me, I am Judith Broll. I'm the Director of Professional Development at the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapy, and I am delighted to be able to chair this webinar today. We appreciate that it has been a year like no other, and we also appreciate how fabulous the profession has been in standing up, rearranging themselves and keeping going and delivering above and beyond the call of their own duty. And I personally and from college would like to really thank you for that work. We know you're all tired, we are all tired everywhere, but the creativity has not ceased to amaze me. So I wanted to thank you for that. And I think also all the work going on behind the scenes to actually get this placement document over the line, which I think is going to revolutionise how we can deliver more expanded and more creative placements. Next slide, please. So you'll be glad to hear it won't be me doing most of the talking on this webinar, and I'm delighted to introduce colleagues who will be doing the talking. So we have Jo Sandiford, who's the Senior Lecturer, Speech and Language Therapist at Leeds Beckett University. And then we have Baerselman, who's the Director in Specialist Speech and Language Therapy for Talking Outcomes, and Nimra Khan, who's a newly qualified practitioner and Speech and Language Therapy Assistant with HearSay. Next slide, please. So in terms of housekeeping, we are very lucky to have RCSLT staff on hand to help with any technical queries you might have, and you can get in touch with them via the chat button, which you will see at the bottom of your screen. Please do send in questions for our speakers today using the Q&A button, and we are really looking forward to hearing what you have to ask us. We'd like this to be as interactive as possible. The event is being recorded and will be available on the website along with the presentation slides if you wish to talk to your colleagues or to review it in future moments. And we'd be very grateful if you could fill out the evaluation form that will appear on your screen at the end of this webinar. Next slide, please. The aims and objectives of the webinar are on this slide. I think they are self-explanatory. I'll give you a moment to read them. And with that, we're going to hand over to Jo, who's going to tell us all about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. And thank you to so many people for joining and for completing the information that you submitted as part of your registration. So it was great to know that there are so many people who've joined who haven't yet worked with students or not done so for a while. So thanks for your interest and enthusiasm. And thanks also for your honest responses about the barriers to working with students too. I think it's really important that we hear those. We're keen to discuss those and problem solve with you about those. So I teach at Leeds Beckett University. I've been there for the last 4 years. Prior to that, I worked in the NHS as a paediatric speech and language therapist, and I was placement coordinator for a large paediatric service. So I do feel like I've sat on both sides of the placement fence, really. And, you know, I think I can sort of share perspectives from both sides, really. I did have the privilege of writing the new guidance with a fabulous team of therapists from practice in the NHS and independent settings, and also from universities across the UK. And it was a really collaborative piece of work. And I hope that we brought to that relevant perspectives from those different angles to support the sort of future development of placements. So I wanted just to kick off by asking you to think about your own placements as a student, really, and what they brought to your training. And there's a few quotes on the slide from recent students. Definitely our students at Leeds say that placements are the best part of the course. And I think the final comment really resonated with me, that actually this is about making a difference for our clients, isn't it? So if we can work with students to support our clients, then it's a win-win for everybody, really. And I think placements are so influential in our choice of career, and in the kinds of therapists that we become. So really important to think about your role within this. So the guidance was published in February of this year. We started writing it in September 2019, and then we paused due to COVID. We had some interim guidance written by my colleague Naomi de Graaf from Leeds Beckett, who did a fabulous job of pulling together recommendations to support placements through the trickiest time, really, of when the pandemic first hit. And we've used that to inform the final guidance that's now been published. So it's web guidance that can be easily updated, and having published it in February, it already needs updating. It's open access so that professionals from other professions, other agencies can access it, which I think is really important too. And it includes the elements you can see on the screen, and lots of other items as well. But I hope it provides a realistic update to the current profession, really, the current practice of SLT. And it includes links to the telehealth guidance, which is obviously really important, given that lots of our practice involves telehealth and virtual engagement with clients now. So obviously placements can take that virtual format. I think one key element of it is a framework which is written to support universities, services, educators and students with their roles and responsibilities around placements. So it's very much a working document that you could use to guide you through setting up, planning, running and evaluating a placement. So I think that's really key. And there's recognition within the document in a super section written by Warda Farah around diversity and inclusion in placements, because obviously that spans placements just as it does across the profession in terms of gender and race and disability as well. So a really important section. There's guidance around educator training and auditing quality assurance of placements, and some information about the tariff, because if you didn't know, there is a small tariff of around £85 a week that you can claim for having a student working with you. So there's information around that. So the guidance does take its position in terms of recognising our individual duty to our future colleagues, to the future workforce of SLTs. It is part of our CPD. HCP's position on student supervision is that it's not mandated, but it is very much supported and recognised as part of our professional duty within the standards of proficiency that we all work towards in our practice. So, you know, HCPC are saying we really should be doing this. Royal College is saying we really should be doing this. In terms of the requirements for students, they need to complete 150 sessions of practice-based learning during their training period, whether that's a bachelor's level or master's level, and a session equates to half a day in essence, and students have to complete a mixture of adult and paediatric placements. And there's a new dysphagia element to placements, which Judith is going to talk to you a little bit more about towards the end. So the key recommendations really from your perspective as educators are that we've taken a decision as a benchmark really to ask every therapist to offer 25 days per year to support practice education pro rata for part-time therapists. But this would really support, you know, the increasing numbers of students that we've got. This does exclude therapists at Band 5 working on their own competencies, but does include leaders and managers and researchers. And I think for the first time, we're starting to hear from people in these positions who are thinking about how they can include students within their work. So we've had some fantastic offers from people in leadership roles who are saying, well, I could have a student working with me 2 days a week doing some audit project or service delivery evaluation, and then they could do some clinical work for 2 days a week for the rest of their placement. So we really can think about how across the piece we can include students. And I know that RCSLT HQ are going to have some students working with them, you know, in the near future. So what a fabulous opportunity that will provide to some students. And I think the other point around specialisms, I think we would acknowledge that, you know, the skills we use with students are the same as the skills we use with our clients. So therefore, breaking down quite complex tasks for students to take a part of that, or to do some information gathering as part of that, or some, you know, additional project work that can support you in your role, in your very specialist or complex role. So it's a real encouragement to think wherever you are working as an SLT with whichever client group, then, you know, there is a role for a student to join you in that work and to be a real asset to you as well. The new guidance gives us increasing flexibility about the composition of placements. So there are lots of ways to support students to develop their competencies. And we've identified that if we take a minimum of 25% of direct client care within our placement, then we can actually look at the rest of the placement composing of a range of other different learning activities. So by direct client-centred care, we mean placement-based activities that will impact directly on a client. So actually working one-to-one with a client or with a group, and also those elements of client care that are about writing case notes, writing reports, writing programmes. Then, you know, that composes the 25% actually with real clients, with work that impacts on a client. But the rest of the placement can be composed of a range of other learning activities. And on the next slide, please. These activities can be a range of different elements. So they can include the educator guiding the student using these different activities, but enabling the student to still gain their competencies through these methods. So this can be discussing case studies, case scenarios, and helping students to think about their clinical decision making. It can be scenario discussions, perhaps around elements like prioritization or ethical dilemmas. It could be role play or simulation, which enables students to really practice their skills, perhaps around their interpersonal skills or their assessment skills. It can be working with experts by experience or service users who are really happy to support students to practice skills for the benefit of the student, you know, to practice case history taking or practice an intervention. Or it could be project work, and we've got some fantastic examples nationally of students engaging in quite large pieces of project work which make up a significant portion of their placement. So that can be things like creating training packages. We've had students who've done some videos of swallowing manoeuvres to use in work with clients. We've had students developing podcasts on voice therapy, and a whole range of projects that will benefit the educator and the service, but are really supportive in terms of the students gaining their competencies too. And also literature reviews. Obviously, students have, you know, the whole of the evidence base at their fingertips, so they can do that literature review that you've never quite got time to focus on or pull together. So these activities can compose, you know, a huge proportion of the placement time, guided by you and supported by you, but can really support, I think, recognition that during COVID, a lot of services have reduced their own client-facing activity. Caseloads are possibly smaller or are just trying to rebuild. So these activities can really be mutually beneficial for students and for services. In terms of supervision, then you as a practice educator will oversee the students' learning, but very much do not need to supervise the students at all times. They don't need to be velcroed to you. Students can carry out activities independently. You can brief them and then they can go and do the work with the client, or go and do a piece of project work and then come back and debrief with you and reflect with you. So as the educator, you have the overall responsibility of signing off the competence for the student. But as part of planning the placement, you can also include time with assistants or with Band 5 colleagues who are not leading on a placement but can still be part of the student's placement. Or with colleagues from other professions, you can, let a student join a physio colleague or a social work colleague for a day. That, will really enhance their placement learning. So as a supervisor, you have that overarching role, but you can definitely plan the placement in a creative way. Also included in the new guidance, there's a fantastic section written by Sarah Buckley, Vice Chair of ASLTIP, about organising placements within the independent sector. And I think this is a fabulous inclusion, really. And Sarah was very realistic, I think, in her thoughts about the impact of student placements, the financial impact of student placements in the independent sector, but ways to use students to your advantage as well, and potentially to increase dosage of intervention for clients, so that there can be that mutual benefit within that sector. There's information about different models of placement, so different ratios of students, and there's a growing bank of evidence around the benefits of peer and multiple ratio models. And I think students really like these. They really like the opportunity to ask questions of a peer, to bounce off ideas with a peer, and to plan and debrief with a peer as well. And that can actually free up time for you as an educator if you get students to do things together. And there are different supervision models. So perhaps settings where therapists don't regularly work, and maybe a care home setting, but where a couple of students could perhaps work in that setting and have a mentor on site, but be supervised remotely by you as a therapist. And we've had an example where some students in a care home developed a training package for care home staff with that remote supervision model. There are loads of examples like that of innovative practice. There are resources and templates that you can use to support your placement position. And there's information about the new apprenticeship route as well, because learners on that route will need to access placement opportunity as well. So that's really important that that's included. And next slide, please. I think this is the most critical time for us to think about placement expansion, really. The guidance replaced the 2006 standards of practice education. And if we look back across the last 15 years, the profession has changed enormously. We've got increasing student numbers. We've got more university programmes popping up, across the nations of the UK. So we've definitely got, an increasing challenge. We know that this is a national concern around all AHPs. And then we had COVID thrown in the mix as well. And I think for the first time, actually, there was a real risk that students may not progress and may not graduate because they hadn't had their placement experiences, when placements were cancelled during COVID. So we've really had to think very differently about how we can make placements viable in the current climate and going forwards. And I think that's allowed us to be really creative, because if we don't do this, we are risking the future of our profession. So the opportunity to think very creatively has come at the best of times, in a way. And I think when I talk about thinking differently about placements, I'm not negating the fact at all that there is an initial investment of time, very clearly, in setting up a placement, but the payoff in the long run really will be to everybody's advantage. So if we start from a place of thinking, well, if I had a student working with me, what could I do? And I maybe could do some of the things on the right of this slide, rather than just thinking, well, what are the barriers? Let's try and look positively and think about the things I could do, if I had students working with me. And I think this helps us to change our approach. We've got the placement expansion campaign running at the moment with Royal College, and those of you that are on Twitter will have seen some fantastic threads, both from educators, students and universities, about innovative and inspiring ways that placements are are working at the moment. We've got placements supported by technology, with perhaps one student in a setting, but other students accessing virtually and being able to gain that experience. We've got leadership and research placements emerging. I have an enormous range of project placements and the development of simulation work as well. So, where educators and universities are working together to develop that. So it really has been the most creative of times, and I really look forward to that continuing. There are some exciting next steps as well. We've got a practice education SEN, the inaugural meeting next week, up and running. So that is just fantastic to think that educators and universities can come together to share good practice, and also to think about, what are some of those barriers and how do we problem solve together to overcome them. And some opportunities to link in with Health Education England and similar bodies in the other nations of the UK who are doing a lot of placement expansion work as well, and developing things like web-based communities of practice, which includes students coming together to support the development of new ideas. So I'm really keen to hear from you about your positive experiences of placements and your reservations as well, so that we can aim to work through them. But on the final slide, I did just want the students to have the last word, really. A few images to just rekindle the joy of working with students or thinking back to your own student days. So here are some of our students raising awareness pre-COVID, but on a Swallowing Awareness Day. And this year they did a fantastic job on Instagram of using social media to raise awareness, of the same issue. They want to get behind campaigns and influence policy. So the Berco 10, when the bubble was whizzing around the country, the students really keen to join in with that. And they are lots of fun. The students dressed as Batman and Spider-Man managed to get me to abseil down the side of our Portland building at the university, 115-foot building, to fundraise for an international venture. So they have lots of energy. They're super keen to join our fabulous profession. So please do think about how you can support them on that journey. So thank you, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thank you so much, Jo. That's great. That was fascinating. Can I please hand over now to Jan and Nimra?
Hi, I'm Jan Baerselman. I'm the owner of a small independent practice called Talking Outcomes based in Hampshire. I spent 20 odd years in the NHS and about 8 years as a manager of a London-based mainstream school service where we trialled innovative placement models with City University. As it's important to learn from mistakes, I'm going to tell you about our failure and then our subsequent success in providing student placements in our practice. And although we are independent, the story is just as relevant for the NHS and other services. So could we have slide 2, please? Thank you. So when I worked in the NHS, it was relatively unproblematic to absorb students into the various services I worked in, and that was for 3 main reasons. Firstly, almost all clients accepted student involvement. Secondly, we received the same monthly pay, even if we reduced our clinical work to accommodate students. And finally, the workload of setting up, organising and providing the placement was shared between a number of staff members. So essentially the infrastructure for placements was in place. Slide 3. The move to independent practice threw up a whole bunch of challenges around supporting students. So firstly, most of our paying clients wanted highly experienced therapists, and they said no to students. They were usually happy for students to watch, but not to lead sessions. And then secondly, the tariff that we received from the university didn't cover the losses that we incurred. So there was only one or two of us reducing client contact to make time for placement educator training, to set up the placements, supervise, write reports and liaise with clinical tutors and students. So we needed to create this infrastructure ourselves. Next slide. So when I sat back and looked at the bigger picture, I realised we had a rather ridiculous conundrum. On the one hand, there was this untapped workforce of student therapists desperate for placements, and that was a national picture. And on the other hand, we had schools and families requesting more speech and language therapy input. And then right in the middle, we had therapists in our practice with more than 15 years of placement education experience with no students to educate, which seemed a total waste. So we needed to find some way of putting these three pieces of this jigsaw together. And I won't lie, it did take the best part of a year alongside our normal work, because you have to fit everything in, to figure out the jigsaw, apply for some funding, set everything up, and engage the right schools. But this was the solution. So in autumn 2019, we started our pilot study, Value Talking, and we placed 4 final year students from Reading University in pairs in 2 primary schools for a 10-week placement. And supervision and support was provided by myself and by the special needs coordinators, the SENCOs in the schools. And then we measured everything we could to find out if the service was effective. So the students measured pupils' outcomes with therapy outcome measures, TOMS, and the students also sent parents and school staff feedback questionnaires at the end of the placement. Then the students completed their own questionnaire by the university because we needed to know that it was working for them as a placement. And we asked everyone how we could make it better with a view to expanding the service if it did work. And it did. So our pilot data was very positive, and we also had positive feedbacks from parents, from staff, and from students. And then we also needed to work out the cost of the placement educator time that it took to set up and run the placement, because we thought we might be able to offer the service out as a low-cost service model to schools that they could buy in. So now I'm going to hand over to Nimra Khan to give you the perspective from a student point of view.
Thanks, Jan. Hi, everyone. I'm Nimra, and I was one of the placement students working with Jan during this pilot study in Hampshire. From my perspective, there were lots of benefits to this involvement of students in the field. I was able to independently communicate and collaborate with teachers, the SENCO, and members of the multidisciplinary team. By consistently working with the same children each week, I was able to create functional goals and follow through on them. I wasn't always on my own, of course. The SLT present would come into my sessions on request, providing advice when needed. And she was available by email to answer questions and follow up each week. As I had not worked on speech sounds myself that often at the point that I did this placement, I requested that the SLT observe one of my speech sound therapy sessions to give me some extra feedback, which was really helpful. Next slide, please. Of course, there were awkward moments too. During some parent and SENCO meetings, I wasn't sure how to answer all the questions presented to me, but this provided an opportunity to say, I'll look into that, and touch base with the SLT to come back with an answer. I really felt like I was part of the team and the community of the school, and I was surprised by how open everyone was to having the students on board. In general, I found that even with SLT not present, the multidisciplinary team still feels that since students are receiving current teachings and bringing creative ideas, they are valuable people to have on the team. Many of the learning goals when students go on placement involve building independence. There were few placements that gave me as much independence as this model did. And having the opportunity to manage caseload and add that to my CV provided great experience and practice for work as an NQP. And I'll pass it back to Jan.
Thanks, Nimra. Excuse me. Thank you. So as for what the students added to our practice, the injection of youthful energy and diversity into our rather non-diverse middle-aged team was really inspiring. So in particular, the international students brought quite interesting new perspectives and stories from their home countries. They all made clever digital resources, and now and again an article or some evidence would just drop into my inbox on request. Essentially, going to work was just more interesting and more fun for the 10 weeks that they were around. Next slide. And then as a service, we became more efficient. So instead of seeing my usual maximum of 3 clients a day, which is a common in independent practice because you have a business to run at the same time, I was now supervising 10 clients per day. Now, what you put in doesn't necessarily guarantee outcomes, but the indicative data from TOMS suggested positive outcomes for around 78% of pupils over 10 weeks, with the best outcomes for children with speech sound difficulties. It is a pilot study though, so we do need to interpret these figures with caution. This also worked for me, this placement, on a much bigger personal level, because having failed to offer more than ad hoc placements for 8 years in independent practice, to then succeed and now be sharing the success here with you is the best feeling. And to know that we will put maybe 30 or 50 more students through placements at our practice, and that we will simultaneously be providing school-funded therapy free for hundreds of families gives me air-punchingly good satisfaction. So, next slide, that's the one. To make this work, we had to completely shift our mindset. I was thinking, how can we fit them in? How can we fit them in? And it just didn't work. Instead, we had to think, we could have 2 days of students per term. What could we do with this? And we'll have some tariff money. What could we do? And had to change the whole thing around in our heads. So on the next slide, you'll see students have really become the solution. Initially, we tried to tag them on or fit them in, and Nimra and I had a conversation about what it feels like when you're slightly unwelcome and you know that you're joining a very harassed team. And until we put final year students at the core in our service, that's how I had been thinking. So tagging them on didn't work. We put them at the core, delivering all assessment and intervention, and it did start to work. So now schools can commission this student delivered service from Talking Outcomes, and it's better value for them than buying in a qualified speech and language therapist, although I'm always there in the background or in the foreground. We're not finance experts, but our approximate costings suggest that schools will get about 3 times as much input for their money this way. That doesn't necessarily mean 3 times the outcomes. We would need a larger, more rigorous study to look at that properly. But the signs are indicative that this service model could work for some students and some schools with the right supervision. And we did a very similar project in London schools in 2003. As we were talking about earlier, there are many other student-delivered service models out there. Aphasia Reconnect and Surrey County Council, to name but a few. As service managers, when we consider skill mix and efficiency, we often look to recruiting paid assistants or technicians, and now apprentices are an option. And I wonder why we don't automatically think of students as potential team members. Maybe that's something we could do more of. Because I believe if we did, we could nail the placement shortage issue, provide more intervention, and better prepare students for our workplaces. Next slide, please. So some of the learning from this, if you're an independent practitioner listening today, I have 3 main learning points to share to help you avoid years of frustration. If I had my time again setting up, I would allocate a day or maybe half a day as my low-cost student-delivered service day. And I would therefore reach some of the families for whom the independent services are just out of reach. And I would also include consent to intervention from student as default on my consent form, because it's a real barrier to try to gain consent retrospectively. The main thing I would do is pick up the phone to my local university placement lead and say, hey, I'd like some students. How can we work together? Here I am. What days are good for you? And I understand that contact details of the placement leads are going to be on the RCSLT practice-based learning web pages in due course. So finally, on the final slide, if you are inspired to try something similar on your own service, the links here will take you to more detailed YouTube presentation and posters summarising previous NHS projects. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Jan, and thank you, Nimra. How fascinating. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions for you as well. It's really exciting to see what it actually means on the ground. So thank you for that. Now, I don't want to spend much time on this work because it's this work in pre-registration eating, drinking and swallowing competencies is going on in parallel with, but we've had lots of consultation with Jo and her team on this piece of work, and I just wanted to mention it because it is relevant, especially to HEIs and to practice educators. So next slide. I think it's really important that we all understand what this is. So these are entry-level eating, drinking and swallowing competencies which will allow learners to graduate with entry-level dysphagia competencies, which we're starting training in next academic year 21, and they will start coming out in 24-25. And I think what this means is that all learners will have some exposure to eating, drinking and swallowing within their pre-registration training. What that will also mean is when they start, and should they like to, they can start working in dysphagia from the minute they graduate. I think everybody's got their own way of working when they hit the ground, and I think normal supervision and NQP frameworks will still apply when the new grads come out, but I think it will give them a higher level of understanding of these issues before they do that. We are focusing on transferable skills. So there are things like taking case history. We all do that, irrespective of whether you're working with eating, drinking and swallowing or within Jan's service as well. You know, it depends where you are, it doesn't matter. We all do exactly the same thing. It is not a requirement to expect clinicians to come out ready to do endoscopy, videofluoroscopy, changing Blomsinger valves. If they see that on placement, that's one thing, and that will help towards it, but that is not the expectation on graduation. And the reasons why we're doing this now are multifaceted. It will make us equitable with our international colleagues within the MRA, which at the moment we are not. We are clearly an outlier. But also during COVID, it has been made very clear to us as a professional body from clinicians going, we need more clinicians who have these skills in eating, drinking and swallowing coming out quicker as possible. Next slide, please. And I think because we have been working with Jo and her team, I think this is about exactly what Jo has already said, so I won't land it that much, but this is an opportunity to think differently about eating, drinking and swallowing in practice placements. And what I would really like to do is to consider how we can do this differently, and the EDS isn't any different from anything else really. I'd like to myth bust it slightly. I think the only difference maybe is initially, I think as Kamini would say, you've got to pull something out to push it back in again. And I think we need to ring fence a few hours, not very many, to ensure that students do receive this exposure to eating, drinking, swallowing right across their placements. Some of those hours, and we've worked very closely with Jo, can be done with simulation and with all the other multifarious things that are now on offer around practice, and some of them have to be face-to-face, because at the end of the day we all need to know that we can interface with individuals around eating, drinking and swallowing. And I think the other thing is to say is that EDS opportunities really do fit into most placements. There is no such thing as a placement that cannot have EDS. You do not need to be a dysphagia trained clinician to help support sign off these competencies. And I think that's something that's really important. And I think if you are sitting in a very high risk area, high risk as in very high specialist EDS skill, don't need to be able to not offer placements. I think that's really important to know. And you need to be able to sign off competencies. Can I have the next slide, please? And I think it's important that you can see what it will look like. And this is taken straight out of the EDF competency framework. This is something that we are hoping that novice learners, as we're now calling them, not students, will be coming out on placement from probably September, October, November this year to help sign off against. We are hoping that most HEIs can use the same framework, so that irrespective of which organisation you are being trained at, there is some overarching framework for novice students to work against. Graduation is 16 out of 20, but actually we know there's always room for improvement, and if you can get 20 out of 20, all the better. Next slide, please. This work has been funded by HEE, but it is for all nations, and we've made that extremely clear. But it is absolutely collaborative. This is going to change the way that speech and language therapists hold and own EDS for us. But I think it's something that we can do together. We are meeting each HEI separately to really understand the nuances of their programs and where their teaching and curriculum will be able to align with these competencies and training. And we are also aware that we really need to engage with clinical practice educators and clinicians everywhere, whether you're in independent practice or whether you're in the NHS or wherever you're working. We know this is going to take a long time, and we are going to be talking a lot about it over the next few months. But we really want you to help us with this. This has to be collaborative. We have not got all the solutions. You have got those solutions, as we can see here. It just takes a bit of thinking how we can think differently. I really like the things you were saying, Jan, about students as team members, putting students at the core of what we do. I think if we can think differently about all placements, including these EDS ones, I think we are really going along the right trajectory. We have 3 webinars which we have got there written for you. Please, if you're interested in attending, there is a link now on the webpage. And this is really to really get under the hood of what it means to deliver these training on the ground, and how they'll be interfaced with HEIs. You can see the pre-registration EDS competencies there, and read more about the project, and Louise, our colleague, is able to help with any queries moving forward. Can I have my next, and I hope final slides? So that's all I have to say on eating, drinking and swallowing. And we have about 15 minutes for questions. Now I realise that I cannot multitask and look at the question box as well as talk. So I wonder whether we could pop the screen share down so we can see all the participants. That's better. I can see you all. There were a few questions that I saw in the inbox before I started talking, so I wonder if we could start with one of those, and then I will go back to the questions. One that I was really interested in was one about supporting speech and language therapists to take on more students, or clinicians who haven't felt the confidence to do it so far, and how might they get involved at this point. Jo, can I ask you to start with that answer? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. I think whichever university that you're linking in with to work with the students, they will offer educator training. So that's a great place to start, to come together with other new educators. And the people running the training will share with you, how to set up the placement, how to support the students' learning. Lots of in our training we do lots of scenario discussion around supporting students who are struggling, adapting a placement for students with different adjustments. So I think that's the place to start. The other option is to think about perhaps a team of therapists taking a student, so that you're part of that team, but you're supported by your colleagues, I think. And maybe if it's a block placement and the student's with you 4 days a week, but to do 1 day of that or half a day of that as a starting point. Because this is about your own skills as a clinical educator, isn't it? I completely understand that. It's about building up your own skills, but in essence the skills are very similar to the skills we use with our clients, about breaking down tasks and setting goals and facilitating learning. So I think start with educator training, but then maybe think about that option to do a joint placement as part of a team, or if it's if you're an independent practice, to maybe think about 2 practitioners coming together to support a placement, so you've got that support of a colleague as well. I think they would be my key points.
Thanks, Jo. Jan, do you have anything to add to that? Any suggestions?
Just the point about joining up with colleagues to offer a service being an option. It's complicated, but through the RCSLT local group network, that's how we tend to chat to our local colleagues. And sometimes some colleagues do things better, they just have other areas of specialism. So a half day here with somebody and here with somebody, or just some flexibility of a day a week where you can say, not this week, that week, and you can move around a bit, might be an option.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think just to say that on the side there will be a poll, I am told, talking about your levels of confidence, or the webinar attendees at the moment, just to see whether this is something that you feel more confident about now that you've heard what is out there and what opportunities there are out there. Another question I see that's come up is around placement hours and how the number 25 was decided upon within the new guidance, and also suggestions. It feels quite a lot for some people and some teams with everything else that's going on in their lives. So any comments about that? Jo, back to you in the first instance.
When we came together to write the guidance, there were practitioners and there were universities involved, and all of the universities had an opportunity to comment on the draft guidance, well, as everybody did as part of the consultation. So that question was raised there as well. And I think when we looked nationally at what the way that universities were requesting placements from educators, lots of us were using a fair share agreement approach based on workforce figures and based on student numbers. And a lot of universities were already working to 25 days. I know the comment says that one university suggesting 10 days as an offer. And I think if you know, 25 days was the figure that seemed to be most commonly being used, and you know, on the basis that we are so short of placements, it seemed to be that we couldn't really suggest lower than that. But we have written into the guidance that if your university doesn't require 25 days, then you know, that should be a local discussion, and you know, an agreement and a suggestion made around, you know, what would be a more realistic offer. I think it's also perhaps about thinking, going back to that point about teams as well, and thinking about, well, you know, as a team, our 25 days would, and it's obviously pro-rata to support people working part-time as well, but if as a team our 25 days would mean we could support 4 students on 1 block placement, then let's look at, you know, how we can divide that up amongst us, and how we can support the students in pairs or in small groups to do pieces of work as well. So I think it is about looking at all the different ways we've tried to bring flexibility into this. Just in that question in the chat, yes, if you offer a peer placement, that kind of is double your time in essence. So if you offered, you know, 2 weeks for a peer, then that would be, you know, 20 days, wouldn't it? So that's a win-win, I think, on lots of levels. It's not mandated, obviously. You know, it's a guidance figure that would really help us to, you know, to move the placement expansion forward, I think. But that's why we decided on 25.
That's really interesting. Oh, and the evaluations popped up on my screen. Sorry about that. I think as well, I was interested to see that it's 25% of what we're suggesting is direct client-centered care, and there are so many options opening up now for non-clinical placement. So I think there are many other ways of delivering that. And yes, we are very excited to get our first placement coming into RCSLT. I think there are very few places that maybe wouldn't be able to offer them all round. So I think there are more opportunities in a way. We're trying to expand where placements could go, which I think is really positive. And it's really positive for the profession as well. I think it will then help with the leadership element as well, see people in all sorts of different areas to get exposure to that. Another question, sorry, it's another one for you, Jo, is around competencies and whether university competencies will need to change to align for this work. Because
yes, I think that, you know, the guidance is there for universities to use to reflect their own practice education policies. And when we did quite a big piece of work looking at the mapping of the HCPC standards of proficiency, you know, the ultimate measure of readiness to practice for our students. And we mapped them across in terms of what we thought you could achieve through a non-client facing opportunity, and the ones that you absolutely had to be directly client facing to achieve. And we identified really that SOPs 8 and 9, so for those of you who don't live in SOPland, unlike those of us at universities, those are the SOPs around communication with clients, so being able to adapt your own communication skills to you know, verbally and non-verbally to clients, and being able to work appropriately with others, so being able to be part of a team and demonstrate those team skills and sustaining and building professional relationships. So SOPs 8 and 9 out of the 15 standards are the only 2 that we felt you absolutely have to be client facing to achieve, but the others can all be achieved through you know, the range of practice-based learning activities, so through simulation and case discussion and project type work. And I think it is the university's responsibility to balance up placement. So if a student has done a project placement or a leadership placement, then their next placement does need to perhaps have an opportunity which involves more client-facing care, to give them, you know, the balance really, because we do need people who, you know, are going to leave university with you know, ready to practice with those client-facing skills, don't we? So I think that's the university's responsibility to balance that up in terms of a student's placement experience across the duration of the course. But I think, you know, because of COVID and the way that we had to adapt all of the placements in, we had cohorts of students last summer, you know, who needed their final placements before they could actually graduate. So I think all of the universities worked really hard to think about how they could do this differently. And therefore, I think we gained confidence in thinking, actually, yes, you know, case discussion, you can, you know, develop your clinical reasoning through that, and you know, role play. Yes, you can, you know, really practice and hone your interpersonal skills through that. So I think we really gained confidence within that throughout the challenges of the last year.
Thank you. That's really helpful. But there's another question around tariffs. I'm very pleased to see speech language therapists chasing money. I think it's really important, and it is a small amount, but it is significant in the long term, Jan. It is really helpful. And you may or may not have to answer this. There's a question about whether all the nations are eligible for tariffs, or because there's somebody in Scotland saying they haven't heard of them. I think it's different across the nations. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct, Judith. Yes, apologies, I should have said that. Yeah, I think that relates just to England. The allocation systems are slightly different across Northern Ireland and Wales and Scotland, and actually the 25 days number is different again in Northern Ireland specifically because of their allocation system. So I should have been clearer on that. But yes, I'm afraid tariff just applies to it's a Health Education England funded element.
Thank you for that clarity. That's really helpful, and I think there are other funding streams within the other nations as well. Can I just, I'm very mindful we're running low on time, but it's such a valuable conversation here. I think there's a lot of support and interest in the SEN around practice education that's starting up. So I'm really pleased about that to get traction. And that sort of fills into another question about, is there a repository either within the guidance around suggestions of best practice or suggestions of how to offer more creative placements? Or is that something that we as RCSLT could take away and think about, or it may be something for you to consider as part of the SEN? Because I think it'd be really valuable, you know, let's learn from each other. I think that's really helpful. Have you got any views on that?
There's a resources section as part of the new guidance, which is being added to weekly, if not daily, as people are very kindly sending in ideas, and students have been contributing brilliantly to that, sending in their own client stories or placement stories. So some of it is definitely held on there, but I think there would be a fantastic role for the SEN to hold that as well, and you know, for people to share experiences through that could be collated and have a repository for them.
Great, I think that would be fabulous. There are a few questions about the EDS piece, all of which we are going to look at in our webinars. I don't want to really use that here, so they will be looked at. Thank you for bringing them up now, but I'm pleased that we've got them covered elsewhere. I suppose I think the final question really should come to you, Nimra, because we are here because of people like you, actually. And I think you were very, very, very generous with your time to come here and tell us about this work working with Jan, which is fabulous. We'd like to thank you for that. I suppose I'm assuming that it has made you have more confidence going into the workplace, but a question, just thinking about old model, new model, is you felt confident not having a speech and language therapist on site with you, I'm assuming, and that having that independence, I don't want to put words in your head. How did you find the experience of how it made you feel coming out as an NQP, having an experience like that with Jan?
Well, thank you for all the praise. Very happy to take part. I agree. It helped me. It was daunting at first because it was different from some other placements I'd done up to that point, where, you know, at the beginning it's a bit more SLT led, and they're usually, you know, always there in the school or in the placement with me. So this was a bit more hands off than what I'd experienced previously. But I agree, it completely made me feel more confident in my own abilities. And where I did feel less confident in maybe the client group, or, you know, the difficulties I was seeing with some of the children I worked with, it wasn't like I was thrown out on my own. I was still able to kind of get that advice and get help where I needed, but I was able to really lead it. And it was really rewarding to see that actually I could do this without always having someone to support me, 100% of the time.
Thank you. And I think that is the future workforce in a nutshell, isn't it? It's feeling more independent and confident. So, so thank you for that. And I think it really shows this different models do work extremely well all around.
Definitely, yeah.
So thank you all round. We are 1 minute on time. I'm quite impressed we've kept time so well. I think one thing that I meant to ask everybody is to know that the next webinar in this series is on Monday, which is around giving voice to trans people. Please do spread it across your networks as widely as you can. It should be a really fascinating webinar. And thank you for your time. The last thing I meant to tell you earlier, and it shows how inept I am at Twitter, is please do join the Twitter conversation at #RCSLT webinar. I think we'd really like to promote all of this. The recording of this webinar will be going onto our website should you wish to dip back into it. And finally, I would really like to thank our fabulous presenters today. So to Jo, Jan and Nimra, I found it fascinating. I hope you have too. Thank you for your work, and we look forward to seeing this work going into all our student placements next year and this. So thank you for your time, and goodbye.